Good day, everyone. Welcome to CX Excellence Chats with Anjali, the podcast that's all about transforming your business through the power of customer experience. I'm your host, a growth and customer strategy consultant with a passion for discovering brand and human relationships. All business growth is ultimately about customers. We dig deep to discover data and customer insights that potentially can power your strategy and help you achieve your growth goals. In each episode of this podcast, we dive into the strategies and insights that can make a huge difference to your business evolution, but powered with a customer lens. The theme for today's episode is brands and CX. As Jonas Sachs said, your brand is a story unfolding across all customer touchpoints. I think that's a beautiful statement of what we are going to do today. The brand is just an intangible, but probably the most valuable asset that any organization owns. Imagine it as a personality that the consumers recognize, or a perceptual image that they hold in their mind. Does that image resonate with the attributes that the organization stands for? But more importantly, how does the customer experience that image in a tangible fashion? To the customer, everything you do is your brand. The products they use, the websites they browse, the social media presence, even the mentions on blogs, the call center agents, the communication, the billboard, the ad, everything is a figment of that core brand promise and how that gets transmitted as a brand experience. So, all of these different touch points are not just brand touch points, but actually customer experience touch points. So today we will delve into this intertwined dynamics of these two crucial aspects, elucidating how a superior CX directly contributes to the growth and fortification of the brand equity. Who we have today with us is a guest who is a CMO turned CX practitioner, actually very much like me. Marketers are usually the most customer driven folks in a company, and perhaps the ones that naturally come with a customer centric mindset by default. They naturally appreciate that consumers gyrate towards brands that make them feel good about themselves, that they can relate with. And that's one of the reasons why many of them take to CX so naturally, like fish to water. So without further ado, let me introduce Beth. Welcome, Beth. We have with us Beth Karawan, the co-founder of ImprintCX, based in New York, USA. ImprintCX seamlessly combines insights, consulting, and activation into one integrated offering. She has an illustrious background in market research with brands like Canon, Maybelline, Mondelez, that's Kraft Foods, in her early days, followed by a vast body of experience in agencies that have worked with large brands like even Colgate. And she was head of brand health tracking in Ipsos before she turned consultant post-COVID. So welcome, Beth, and we're really happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, would you like to add a little bit more about yourself before we move forward into, starting our chat?
Just that I think I agree with you that marketers or people who have been in charge of brand marketing and consumer insights, it is a very natural shift to move to customer experience. It is a very similar skill set. You're just applying those skills in a different way.
Very well said. So let me then start with this very basic and obvious question, which is that, when you made this transition from marketing to customer experience, how easy or tough was that path? You said it comes naturally, so it's probably just an extension. But, very interestingly, you also say on your profile that CX is a BFT. So maybe explain a little bit about what you mean there and how you made that transition.
Sure. So it was a very easy transition, not just because the skill sets are very similar and they're easily transferable, but if you think about it, both marketing and customer experience are about influencing human behavior. It's just that one, when you're doing marketing, it's to benefit the company or the brand, right? It's very self-centered right? It's how do I get customers to buy more of my products? That's why I am marketing to them. Customer experience really puts the customer at the center. Customers have wants and need solutions, and customer experience is making sure that you're fulfilling against those needs and those wants and those solutions. I also have a background in consumer insights and shopper insights, so looking at things from a retailer aspect. And as you pointed out, those are all aspects, those are all touch points along the customer experience journey as well. So to me, it was a pretty natural transition.
Wonderful. So, as you've said, both of these are just two sides of the same coin, right? I always also maintain that commerce happens somewhere at the confluence of both of these. Very simplistically said, one could say that brand is a promise and experience is probably the fulfillment of that promise, right? In some sense, is the real test of what you set out as an expectation. Did you really deliver it? And in some sense, the brand lays out what the experience should be, and the experience in reality impacts the equity of the brand. And it could impact it positively or negatively depending on how the experience goes. So in your experience, how have you seen the two being mutually interactive, and how do they impact each other?
So it's really, when you're doing brand management specifically, and you think about all of the things that go into it, marketing is just one aspect of it. But if you think about how you manage a brand in totality, it's about the consistency of your message. As you mentioned in your introduction, it is, what are you saying? What do you look like? What's the website experience? Are they interacting with your products? It's all of that. Is there a consistent look and feel and communication to everything that you do as it relates to your brand? Customer experience is about, at its bare minimum, the consistency of delivery. Making sure that every single interaction that customers have with your brand is consistently well done. There's a lot of debate around, do you want to be consistently good? Do you strive for always being wow factor and really impressing customers? But at a bare minimum, you have to be consistent at all times. And so that's really also where the confluence of those two things come together and have an impact on each other. You can have the greatest brand in the world that's really unique and has a really strong differentiation in the marketplace. And if you have a bad experience, and if customers have a bad experience, they might be a little bit more likely to give you some leeway, but that's not the case with most brands. Right? There's not a whole lot of differentiation. So you have to be really consistent. One of the examples that I give is, think about, you go out to dinner and you go to a restaurant and the hostess is really friendly and the ambiance is really nice and the server's very nice to you and takes your order and everything's going along very smoothly. And the server comes and delivers your glass of wine, and there's a thumbprint on your glass. That lack of attention to detail in terms of keeping things consistent is going to ruin the experience.
Yeah.
So that's how we think about, everything needs to be in support of one another. If you change one, it impacts the other, and vice versa.
So well said. And brand is nothing but a promise and an expectation. And I think it's so important to consistently continue to deliver on that. So, one of the ways we marketers go and woo customers when it comes to winning them, we continue to find ingenious ways to become part of their lives, right? And it's not like the consumers will walk into our lives. We've got to penetrate their lives and see that we become part of their world. So key aspect is, how does a brand make the consumers feel? And a lot of the times decisioning that happens is a bit of logical left brain and a bit of maybe the imaginative or emotive right brain. But I think when it comes to brands, is a lot more right brain led. That's my opinion. But I think all of us take decisions based on how we feel rather than how we think. Of course, we may later on justify using logical facts to say, hey, that was a reason, but maybe it's, in the inner guidance comes from somewhere else. But in your opinion, what does it really take for brands to build stories for customers? Do they really come from brand storytelling? Do they come from telling consumer stories to make consumers in sort of take part or be engulfed in that brand? How does that really work?
So I think it used to be that customers used to aspire to use brands, right? Brands were very aspirational, and it was very passive. They just expected the stories that they told were to bring customers in. Now it has to be much more interactive, and brands need to prove why they deserve to be a part of customers' lives. Like you say, choice is not always a rational choice. It can be very emotional. So, for example, if you think of brands that have social causes as a part of their brand promise, brands like Patagonia or Bombas, that for every pair of socks that you buy, another pair of socks is donated. That is a way of those brands showing to their core target audience, we understand that social causes are important to you. We understand that you're a very empathetic, caring person. You want to be able to do more. Doing more sometimes is hard. We understand that too. We're going to help you feel better about the choices that you make. So that is how they have incorporated those stories to make those connections with customers. And I think the stories, it's not even so much about stories anymore as much as what customers really want is brands that are going to provide them with solutions, reinforce their beliefs. Like you said, it's that emotional connection, help them show other people that they care, and are a representation of their personality. So that is what brands have to do today. They can't just be passive and tell this great aspirational story and wait for the customers to come to them. They have to prove why they need to be a part of customers' lives.
Yeah, so well said. Customers no longer aspire to be part of your story, but they choose the brands based upon the stories that the brands are telling. And especially when you talked about purpose, the new generation, Gen Z, even more than Gen Y, is a generation of kids that are so much more sensitive. Sometimes they feel they were served a raw deal when they came to this planet, and the condition that it is in, the deterioration that we've seen over the centuries, and they tend to choose brands which are more responsible by way of sustainability or social development goals and so on. And I think it's for today's brands that want to appeal to such audiences, it's no longer an option, but almost like a mandate to say, how do we get them to see that we are responsible, that we have purpose at the core of us, and that becomes fairly important to both acquiring and retaining customers, isn't it?
I agree. And I think there's two really important components to that. I think the first one is that, again, as we've been talking about, that consistency of your brand message and that consistency of your customer experience. In order for that to come across authentically, it has to be baked into everything that you do. It can't just be we're donating X amount to this charity because they've done some research to find out that some specific social cause is important to their core consumers. That's just like greenwashing, right? Greenwashing, pinkwashing, throwing an eco symbol on there, throwing a pink ribbon on there, and saying, yes, we support the same causes that you do. Today's customers see right through that. They recognize when that's not being done authentically and when that's not an authentic part of the brand story. I think the other thing too that's really important in terms of the delivery of that is that your brand promise doesn't just have to be understood and believed by your customers. It has to be believed and supported by your employees as well, because your employees are responsible for delivering against that brand promise. And if they don't feel connected to it and they don't feel the emotion behind it, again, it's never going to come across as authentic, and that's really important.
I so agree. It's about walking the talk and it's about demonstrating through every action that we really mean business when we say something, and we prove that time and again, not just through what we speak, but through what we do. And as you said, I think every part of the organization and the employee team kind of also carries that in essence forward with them. So I think wonderfully aligned on that. So one of the key roles of the marketing office is really to enroll all the other functions into this brand story, right? Be it coming from the purpose or whatever role that we are playing in consumers' lives, whether it's a problem we are solving through our products and services, or whatever it is that we aim to achieve, or how we add value, especially for sales and service, which are the more customer centric functions, more facing functions. But there's also a bevy of other functions who sometimes feel like, hey, it's not my job to really do anything for the customer, because what I do is really at the back end and I don't really possibly own a piece of that cake. So is that really the kind of thinking that you see in American organizations, or is that different there? And if so, if you believe that everybody is responsible, then how is the marketing office sort of championing this whole cross-functional collaboration with the customer as the unifier?
So we absolutely do see that in the organizations that we work with in the US. The biggest things that we see are lack of alignment across different groups within the organization, conflicting goals, and competing objectives. And so when every part of the organization is in a silo and they're only concerned about their own objectives and their own goals, and people aren't unified in terms of a total strategy, that's where the breakdown occurs. So you're right. You get people who are customer facing, who recognize their direct responsibility in terms of the customer experience. And then you maybe have some of those back end people who are like, well, I don't really ever deal with customers, so why is that my problem? For example, if you are a SaaS provider and your finance organization is constantly sending out invoices to the wrong person, to the wrong address, in the wrong amount, it doesn't matter how great of a product you have or what good relationship your customer has with the sales associate that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. Those invoices problems are going to be a pain point for them. That is a reflection against your brand. That is part of the customer experience. And so when we teach organizations about this and why it's everybody's responsibility, what we do is we explain the concept of there's the experience creators, those people who are direct customer facing, and then everybody else who may not deal with customers on a day-to-day basis, your experience enablers. The job that you do enables the people who do have face-to-face interactions with the customer to do their job well. That is why everybody within the organization is responsible. I think the other thing too, that's important to remember that we explain to organizations is that you may have a CX team or group, or maybe there's just one person in the entire organization who's in charge of CX. Their job is not to do CX. It is not solely their responsibility. Their responsibility is to set the strategy, align everybody within the organization, empower everybody, again, those experience creators and those experience enablers, to really take on the role of how they deliver against the customer experience, and to educate and coach. That is the job of somebody who takes on customer experience as part of their responsibility. It's about bringing all of those functions together to work cross-functionally to deliver consistently good customer experience.
Yeah, I think absolutely true that the CX person needs to work in a more wider fashion than more, deeper. Whilst I think it traverses both sides, but I think this wide role is very important to enroll everybody into that thinking and customer first approach. But this also is a very interesting segue into what I wanted to speak about next, which is how can we really influence it? Because probably they're not the most senior most people, and therefore the whole conversation about, is this really this customer first approach, is this about top down thinking, or is it about bottom up thinking, or a mix of the two?
It's really about a mix of the two, right? Because customer experience isn't, yes, it is about being customer centric, but it's not just about that. It's also about understanding your employees' perceptions and behaviors and how that impacts the experience that customers have. So it truly is both coming together. Customer experience strategy cannot solely be dictated from the top down. If you don't, because what happens generally in those types of situations is you're telling your organization what to do, not why it's important, what their role is. It's just a dictation. Whereas if you work from the ground up and you involve all of your employees in the brand promise, the brand strategy, your customer experience strategy, then everyone feels like they are empowered and have ownership. And so that's really important. And what that also, doing both at the same time, what we find, what that also solves for is a lot of times there is a disconnect between what customers' perceptions are of the experience and what the employees' perceptions are of the customer experience. So I'll give you an example. We worked with a beauty subscription service, and they wanted to map the customer journey, and they were convinced they absolutely knew what their customer pain points were. And they were also convinced they had 3 brands, and they were also convinced that they knew what the pain points were for each one of those brands and that they were all different. And they wanted to prove that so that they could go back and create a strategy on how to fix those. Well, the reality is that there's not very many different ways that you can shop for a beauty subscription service, and there's not really many ways that you enroll. So in actuality, the experiences that customers were having with each of these brands was very, very different. And the employees were convinced that product delivery and issues with late delivery and issues with broken product, that was absolutely customers' number one problem that needed to be solved. They needed to figure out a way to fix that. And so we did work to understand the customer journey. And actually what customers told us was, yeah, it happens from time to time. It's kind of annoying, but that is not my biggest pain point. My biggest pain point is repetitive products. You promised me every other month I was going to receive a box of lots of different types of products. Well, after doing this for a year, every other month I'm always getting a lipstick, I'm always getting a mascara, and I'm always getting an eyeshadow palette, and it's always in the same colors. Where's the surprise? Where's the delight? Where are the products that are going to get me to try new things? That was their biggest pain point. And so that's another reason why you need to not just have it dictated from the top down, and you need to do the research to truly understand what the customer experience is, because there's oftentimes a disconnect between what employees and what organizations believe versus what customers actually say is happening.
No, I completely agree. I think the top down is still important to sort of set the tone from the top in terms of the behaviors that are expected. But yes, the true learnings and the finer insights will always come from the front line. which kind of then move up to say, this is what we're really solving for. And to some extent, the example that you stated about, what was being delivered in the box was a lot also about the promise that the brand would have made initially, which is that we will surprise you. And they just stopped that surprise. And clearly that became a discontent, right?
Right. And I think your point is a valid one too, in terms of having it come from the top. It's not just about setting the strategy, but it also demonstrates to the organization that they are supporting this effort. That's another really big challenge that we see a lot of times, again, in that misalignment of what frontline employees and are really dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and know are the issues and know what the pain points are and how they want to deliver against the experience, and an executive team that think, well, it should be this and it should be that, and you need to do it this way. And there becomes this disconnect. And in organizations that are truly customer centric, you have an executive team that is truly supportive of these efforts, because they recognize that these customer experience efforts have a direct impact on financial goals. And so if you can get those two to work together, that's really when you become truly a customer-centric organization.
Sure, sure. I mean, you've talked about, what makes us truly customer centric. We've talked about walking the talk. We've talked about the role of the employee. And I know this is done to that question, but I cannot not ask you this, is that why do you believe that good CX cannot survive without great employee experience? And also you say that employee experience requires a lot of tender loving care. And why do you think that is important?
So someone said to me recently, your customer experience can never be greater than your employee experience. And I thought that that was such a genius way of putting it. If your employees don't feel as valued and as important as the people that they serve, they are never going to be motivated and inspired to deliver against the experience that you are promising your customers. So I don't want to name names specifically, because they're not my clients and I haven't ever worked on them. These are just my personal opinions. But there are very large organizations. It's usually about the top 5 that get mentioned every single time in every single article and get held up as the pillars of excellence in customer experience. I would say 3 out of those 5, however, in the news recently, it's well known how terribly they treat their employees. Issues with unionization, issues with overwork, issues with putting employees on furlough. So how can you hold these up as beacons of excellence in customer experience if we all now know, again, because it's no secret, it's in the news, that they are having a very difficult time in terms of how their employees feel like they are being treated. And so that's why I say your employee experience needs as much tender, loving care as your customer experience does.
I think you kind of alluded to the brands, and I think I know who you're talking about, but we said we're not going there. But it's so true that recently we concluded also another very interesting project where it was around customer delight and customer lifetime value, and keep bringing them back into the fold. And we realized the big issue was not with the customers. It was the people that were delivering the experience, and a lot of work that went back into addressing, their recruitment policies, their internal growth policies, their motivation, their training. And I think that just doing that made a huge difference to the way the customers were experiencing them. But I think it also depends on the type of business, but where your interaction with customers is a lot dependent on your employees, where the touch points are more human, the interfaces are more personal. I think that's where the impact is even more. When it's digital, you can sometimes get away with a lot of automation and botification and quasi personalization. But yes, I think it's a world where the two are anyway coexisting. And I think a bit of the both are very important to sort of deliver the required goods to customers, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember that digital tools have become a necessity in this world, absolutely. But they are just that. They are tools. They are enablers towards delivering an experience. They are not the solution. So you still need to have that where it is appropriate and necessary. You still need to have that human to human connection. So even in something as, for example, you're a SaaS provider and you have a customer that's generally satisfied with your product and they haven't had any complaints over the past year. And so no complaints, no problems. They're getting ready to renew and the price of their service goes up by 50%. No phone call, no explanation, just an automatic generated email that says, okay, your subscription is due and we're going to raise the price by 50%. Where's the human interaction? Where's the concern for the customer? Pick up the phone. Those things are still necessary in order to keep customers satisfied. You can't just assume because they haven't complained that everything is okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think transparency and the power of communication can override a lot of these potential problems. But a lot of people shy away from doing that proactively and saying, we'll figure it out when it comes back to us, but it usually comes back to bite you badly.
Absolutely. There's, I won't mention the industry because some of this information is proprietary, but they've done the research to prove that when prices are going to increase, if the salesperson who is responsible for that account calls the customer proactively to explain the reason that this is about to happen, the reasons behind it, and can come to them with potential solutions as to how to potentially mitigate this increase, those customers have a satisfaction rate that is almost equal to customers who haven't had a rate increase at all. It's the difference is that, customer service people who took that, like you say, initiative and were proactive can mitigate those kinds of issues.
Yeah, because eventually relationships are based on trust. And how do you build trust if you're not upfront and transparent and communicative and also simplistic and clear and focused in your approach and in your sincerity and genuinity? I mean, there's just so many, there's simple things, but sometimes we feel it's important to do that in personal relationships. So we forget that even in a business relationship, these are as important, if not more, to build that kind of confidence and trust in people coming back to us and giving us repeat business, be it B2C or B2B. I think some of these basic principles do completely continue to prevail.
Completely agree. Yeah, like you say, authenticity, trust, communication, honesty, anything that you would want to have in a personal relationship is just as important in a business relationship. And lack of communication from both sides doesn't necessarily mean that nothing is wrong. You've got people who are always going to complain and always tell you what their issues are. And then there's, generally a lot of people in the middle who are like, I'm not happy, but I'm not unhappy. I'm just sort of in the messy middle. And eventually, if something better comes along, I might switch to a different service or to a different product, but it's not worth me making any sort of change. But they also don't feel valued either. And again, that's where the human experience and that human connection becomes so important.
Okay, this is actually a very natural then move into the next question, which is around really understanding customers at a more deeper level, and you worked a lot with US brands and with a lot of research agencies. You've got a lot of years in consumer research as well as marketing agencies who have been supporting these brands with consumer insights. And that all brands obviously value a lot all of these VOC and consumer scores. And I mean, the importance cannot be undermined. I mean, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So it is certainly important to measure and invest in measuring. But do you think that today with organizations and brands doing things like NPS and CSAT and brand health tracks and communication studies, and there's a fair bit of data and information that's available, which is primary, there's also a lot of secondary data and so on, market data. How does one sort of interpret all of this data about deciphering the customer relationship with the brand, and really collecting VOC is not doing CX, is it?
Right. It's not. It's doing VOC, having an NPS study. That's not doing customer experience. You're just collecting information, and when you're doing those types of things, you're just collecting data on a single interaction. That's it. That doesn't give you a complete story. Even VOC doesn't necessarily give you a complete story of the customer journey and the customer experience in totality with your brand. So voice of customer programs typically are more in-depth, have a little bit richer data than just straight metrics like NPS or CSAT or brand health trackers. But what we find is a lot of times companies don't really take the time to understand and synthesize the data that's being given to them. They collect it, but they don't necessarily act upon it. They don't necessarily do the due diligence to do that. And so the reason why then people say having an NPS or having VOC is doing CX is because having one score or having one number is easy to understand, and it is easy to fix, make it higher, make it better, or whatever. But what's really hard is to fix the underlying cause.
Which is the how.
Right. Which is like this is the underlying cause of that low score. It's much more difficult. It's more time consuming. It's more expensive. People don't want to take responsibility for it. And so the focus becomes on how can we fix the metrics, not the problem. I think the other issue today too that becomes very important to understand when you're doing these programs and collecting this data is, and I know we see this in the US, I don't know if you see this where you are, but customers are so over surveyed right now. They get surveys for every single interaction that they have with a brand. And so they're not inclined to really share their true feelings. Or again, you get the people who are going to respond who are really, really unhappy, and the people who have those one-off experiences that are really, really fabulous and are really, really happy. And you've got the majority of your people in the middle who aren't saying anything at all. And you just don't know what's going on there. So metrics are lagging indicators. They don't really give you a clear picture of what the customer's relationship is with your brand. Customers are so over surveyed right now by brands and retailers. They get, as soon as they leave the store or as soon as they've made a purchase, they get surveyed. NPS survey. How do you feel? And that's not really very accurate. It's a moment in time. It's very transactional. And in isolation, those types of studies don't really tell you what the customer's relationship is with your brand. And so you really need to make sure that you're designing the right types of programs and have the right types of research in place to truly capture insights, not just data, on what customers relationship is with your brand.
Yeah.
The other issue with that is a lot of times this data is looked at in isolation and not holistically. So the CX team is responsible for the NPS study, and the research team is responsible for your brand health tracker, and the marketing team is responsible for any type of comms studies, and your operations team is responsible for CSAT, and everybody's got their own survey, and everybody's got their own data, and everybody thinks that their data is most important. And nobody's taking the time. What we find is nobody's really taking the time to look at all of that information holistically to get at the true insights and to get at the true picture of customers' relationships with brands.
So true. So as you said, I think it's not too different in any part of the world. We see the same things here. I mean, I spoke to a very senior service head in a bank, and we were talking about customer data, and he said we looked at, all of the verbatims in the contact center, and all the information that was flowing in through emails and all of the touch points. And I said, yeah, but what about the information on the social channels? And he said that's for the marketing team to do. And really, it is broken. It is. So that holistic view that you talk about is so important. And I think that is why the CX is sort of that one owner who can synthesize everything together, take that one view, and be able to say, what are these metrics telling us? And this whole obsession with scores rather than insights. And as you said, it's not just how it's trending, but why is it like that? And how do we correct it? Just a few days back, we were in a meeting and we said, hey, this is a data rich company, but a very insight poor company. We don't know what's going on. And do you see the same thing there?
We do. We absolutely do see that. I spoke with somebody not too long ago who described the CX function as the conductor of an orchestra. How do you bring each section together to create beautiful music? Because yes, each one of those sections, the brass section, the wind section, the percussion section, each one of those sections on their own can do fine and create beautiful music, but the richness becomes in the person who's conducting all of them together. And that's really the role of the CX person. I think that's another reason why, going back to the beginning of our conversation, why a lot of marketers are a natural fit for this type of role, because generally those are the people who have the most interactions cross-functionally within organizations. If I think of a typical CPG model, the person who is the brand manager, they have to deal with the sales organization, they have to deal with the product development organization, they have to deal with insights, they have to deal with finance, they have to deal with creative. So they are used to working cross-functionally and bringing everybody together to create a great brand and to manage a great brand. And so to then transition into a CX role is very natural.
Yeah. I see the point totally. I think both of us have experienced that in our own journeys and somehow made that transition. But you know what? There was one more interesting anecdote that connected both of our journeys, and that was our common interest, rather, if I could say, love for F&B. Especially in the restaurant space. And I happened to just pick that up from something that you had written. But we both had some nuanced engagement as part of our respective journeys with the restaurant world, right? Mm-hmm. It is about food, but I think a large part of it is about the direct engagement and live impact in an environment which is devoid of digital devices, and we are able to actually make a difference on the spot. What do you have to say about that part of your experience? I know you've done that quite a bit.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I love about having those experiences is that it is instant gratification. As CX practitioners and as consultants, the companies that we work with, we don't always see immediately the impact of the strategies and the programs that we create. It takes a while to see the momentum. It takes a while to see the impact on a company's financials. But when you are in a restaurant, whether you are a host or a server, you know immediately and have a direct impact on whether or not your customer is going to have a great experience. You are solely responsible, and you can see right away if things are going well or things are not going well. So yes, it is absolutely part of my background. It is something that I love. You mentioned at the beginning in terms of how I made the switch post-COVID. From the time that I was at Ipsos until the time that I started ImprintCX, I did actually go back and work in restaurants. And it reminded me why I love basically why I love customer experience so much, because it is so very human, and it is about making that human connection.
Fabulous. On that note, I think that's a great way to sign off. But I really, really want to thank you for your time and your inputs. And I think it's been a most amazing conversation. It's a subject that's it's close to both of our hearts. And I think it comes so naturally to us. And I think hopefully that comes out very evidently in the conversation. But before we sign off, any parting thoughts you'd like to leave the listeners with?
I don't have anything specific. I mean, again, personally, my own opinion, if you have an opportunity to read books like Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Giadara or Your Table is Ready by Michael Cecchi-Azzolina, if you are an F&B person like we are, if you are a restaurant person like we are, and you want to learn lessons on how to take those lessons from the restaurant world and apply them into CX, even though those are not CX books, I think they're both really great examples, and I highly recommend them.
Lovely. Sounds like a great way to leave our audience with something to look for and also probably read. So find them and read them. So I think, summing up our conversation, what I'd like to share is that the foundation of a successful brand lies in creating trust and credibility with customers. I think we've spoken a lot about understanding our customers truly deeply, but we've also talked a lot about creating brand promises and expectations which we can fulfill through experiences that we can create that actually deliver on those promises. And I think the subject really of brand equity and CX being so intertwined, I think the both together can potentially unlock tremendous value through bringing in a customer-centric approach. I think that really is the key to creating great brands and great experiences and great relationships with customers, which can be both sustainable and highly valuable. So on that note, we will sign off on today's podcast. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. And thanks to the listeners for being here with us today on this episode of CX Excellence with your host, Anjali. We enjoyed the conversation, so hope you have enjoyed it as well. And you can see the roles of brand building and CX working for you. And please feel free to reach out to me or Beth if you want to carry this conversation further. Now, remember, your business success depends upon great customer experience and great brand building. And so please go ahead and do what you believe is the right thing to do to use both these to your advantage. Until the next fortnight, please keep mastering the art of CX. If you have enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe, leave a review, and share it within your network. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.